What an asshole. I mean, so what if he's the thief that everybody forgets about, whose only piece of dialogue is, "But Carl's up there," who is barely visible till the end? His fate should have been resolved. Okay, so obviously the Die Hard franchise is not only comprised of Christmas movies, but the first two are, emphasis on the first, so I think it's a good way to kick off what used to be the beginning of the Christmas season. Possibly the most iconic action movie franchise period, I don't think Die Hard needs too much of an introduction. Successful in part due to the everyman protagonist John McClane, portrayed by Bruce Willis, the legendary film kicked off a franchise spawning 4 sequels, and what we're gonna do today is see how these movies range in quality from "why did this happen" to as good as it gets. Hopefully that won't give away too much, but in the possibility that I offend somebody, do not forget this is only my opinion. Something I don't usually bring up, as it should be obvious, but I warn you. Shocking picks a weight. Yeah, so this is all 5 Die Hard movies ranked. Kicking things off with a movie that everybody seems to love but me. A Good Day to Die Hard. I mean, you can't really blame them. There are things to like about this movie. If you exclude any remote logic, enjoyability, fun characters, stuff that every movie thus far had, I guess you could maybe not hate it, if you don't think about it. But for the most part, this kind of fucking sucks. They brought in Jai Courtney to play John McClane's son, the same guy who would soon be beyond miscast as Kyle Reese in Terminator Genisys, because when in doubt, give the lead character a son who doesn't like him. This has about the outcome you'd expect, not to mention them both being incredibly dull, but when thinking about the failure that is this movie, that's not really what comes to mind. I tend to lean toward the bad guy's motivations. It's the die-hard villain plot that gets more convoluted as these movies go, but one thing about this really sticks out.
€1 billion worth of enriched uranium.
If you consider the fact that Yuri has the army at his disposal, the money they've spent on everything up until this point, multiple explosions, that chopper, and that Yuri is a former billionaire, not exactly a profitable endeavor. On top of that, the logic when it comes to radiation is completely absent. I know these movies aren't exactly known for logic, but anti-radiation spray? Yeah, we have our climax in which the heroes don't contract what should be 10 types of cancer, but the gall to try and pass off anti-radiation spray as a legit thing would be comedic, if not for the movie just being void of that and the ability to have fun with itself. This is the only Die Hard movie that I can say is just not fun. The action somehow outdoes the previous film in terms of just not making sense, and aside from maybe the car chase, the majority of it feels empty. The gray color palette doesn't help, but it just feels dumb this time, and given the movie's lack of effort, I can't get past it. There's too many plot holes to count, the plot is boring and easy to predict, and up until re-watching it, I honestly couldn't remember a thing about it. That is aside from it being the definition of a cheap cash-in, and the only good thing about it is it's not long. That, and the underappreciated Rolling Stones track Doom and Gloom in the credits, the ending really is the best part. It's kind of ironic too, as this is one of the few Die Hard movies to be written as a Die Hard movie, opposed to being rewritten into that, but somehow it feels the least like it. It's a generic action movie, as generic as they come. Maybe they wanted his son to take over, I don't know, and I don't care. A Good Day to Die Hard is anything but good, unless you actually want to do what the title says. Also, I'm just getting in, this is actually not a liked movie, but I assure you, the next pick will have you so mad, the comment section won't come close enough.
Yeah. What the hell? It's Christmas!
That's right, I'm putting a movie from the original trilogy, the first ever sequel, all the way in 4th place. And it's completely original. Nobody else does this. Okay, I guess the reason most people, and me included, look at Die Hard 2 as one of the less good movies is primarily for being the same as the first movie. The plot is very similar, all the way down to this being the only other movie to take place during Christmas, but unlike the original, the Christmas element kind of feels pointless if not for the fact that it's, well, a sequel. A lot of the elements do involve a snowstorm, which is by no means guaranteed in December, so I guess they knew that would happen. And there is a memorable kill involving an icicle, but again, it's not Christmas themed, it's just ice. That being said, I'll give the movie some credit as the premise is, dare I say, more unique. The idea of holding people hostage via planes by shutting off the runway lights is a good idea, and seeing John try and fail to stop one of these from crashing is a somewhat deep moment you don't usually get from this franchise.
McClane, I know what you must feel.
However, this does heavily tie into what may be the biggest problem with this movie, even if it was a standalone movie, and that is his attempts to stop the plane being starting a fire is the same thing that happens at the end of the movie. Don't get me wrong, it's a great ending, definitely second best, but it's also the solution. By blowing up their plane, it's assumed the fire created by the explosion will be enough to help the other planes land safely. The problem is, they've already tried that, and even if we're meant to believe it was too late for that plane, couldn't they have just done this at any time? The first time I saw the movie, I had to suspend my disbelief, that being causing a huge explosion was impossible, or just wouldn't do any good. But given that is what they do in the end by accident, well, I can't suspend my disbelief that much. I can probably say this is the franchise's dumbest moment, despite 5 being way worse, and the conclusion when John and his wife meet up at the end just didn't seem deserved. Given they break up off-screen anyway, as they always do in these movies, you could have just cut this scene out completely and it wouldn't have affected anything. It brings me to another issue of side characters not having the effect they did in the original, and the villains aren't really that memorable either, give or take a few lines.
That concludes our object lesson for this evening.
I'd say in the end, Die Hard 2 is definitely an acceptable, good enough sequel, but can't compare to the original due to its straightforward premise and being too much like it. This definitely isn't that contrarian-like so far, but the next pick, fuck it, you know what it is. Yeah, the 4th one. It's to be expected. I'd argue it's still not that great, and just edges out Part 2 in my opinion. It released as Die Hard 4.0 outside of North America, becoming the highest grossing movie in the franchise, and given it took 13 years to come out, it's no surprise it wasn't originally meant to be a Die Hard movie. This is when the action got real dumb, completely abandoning the everyman character the original movie established. But unlike Part 5, I wouldn't say it's boring. It's a bit ridiculous, but still enjoyable. I get a kick out of John being impervious to a massive jet, the scene in the tunnel is kind of just fun as hell, and the apartment bit throws in a lot of fun moments, like Matthew attempting to lock the door, and the Terminator setting off the explosives. What is boring, kind of ridiculous, and not as enjoyable, is the antagonist.
Lucy, hang up the phone.
Please, John. I'm trying to have a conversation.
Portrayed by Timothy Olyphant, Gabriel is not exactly as memorable as the villains of the previous movies, and the plot overall isn't as interesting. The stakes are a lot higher, focusing on computer hacking and terrorism, but overall it's not that great, and in the end it ends up being about money, as every one of these movies seems to do, because that's the only twist they have in mind. Still, once you get past that, the movie is quite good. The action set pieces are fun despite being stupid, there's a number of memorable deaths, I know the ending would likely result in your arm being ruined, if not blown off, but who cares? And I do like a lot of the side characters. Not the villains so much, they're kind of just there, but Justin Long as Matthew Farrell is a nice addition. The scenes with Kevin Smith are quite good, which he actually has writing credits on despite being uncredited. And the inclusion of John McClane's daughter is a hell of a lot better than his boring-ass son. I'd probably call this the most basic movie in the franchise. Not required viewing, but definitely good enough to justify its existence. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But I wouldn't go any further.
Uncle, you better come look at this.
What?
There's a white man standing in the street.
I seen one.
Not like this.
Now we've reached channel suicide moment. Number 2 is Die Hard. With a vengeance.
Shocking.
I'm going to assume the opening clip made that obvious, that it's the only movie to star Samuel L. Jackson, but there's no getting around it. Most of these movies rank the same way for a reason, and this is the only one that really comes close to the original. For the sake of doing something different, I looked for a reason why it may be the best, which I could not, but it does do a lot of things to make it stand out. Originally titled Simon Says as a reference to the antagonist Simon Gruber, easily second best in that category as well, Die Hard with a Vengeance has a lot of what made the first movie so good, with some new things thrown in to shake things up. The gimmick in which Simon makes them solve elaborate riddles was a great way to make him stand out, and give us some memorable set pieces making us question what's really going on. Unfortunately, the movie does have one too many twists thrown in toward the end, inevitably leading to the same conclusion about money, but there's no denying it's way more engaging than any sequel to come after this. I really wish they didn't have him and Holly broken up, just to hint at resolving it and then go nowhere with that. The whole thing is a bit cliche, and the ending is possibly near the least memorable. It feels tacked on, oddly enough. The bit about Zeus's belt being stuck was just a cheap way to not have him do anything, and the kill is a bit disappointing. There's enough flaws to keep this movie in second place. In fact, most of my notes upon analyzing this consist of flaws, but that doesn't mean it isn't a great movie. The action set pieces are all great this time. The subway, the ship, I like pretty much all of them. The two leads do a great job making this feel genuine, and I can't go without bringing up the race dialogue in this movie. So, before I do, remember to like and subscribe, in case you don't want to after this. Not that I'm gonna say anything remotely offensive, but you know how it is. We all know the infamous thing John McClane must do at the beginning of the movie. I'll respectfully not say or show what it is, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't see any issue with this. I'm a believer in the concept that to be offensive, you have to do something offensive and act like it's okay, or do it purely for comedic purposes. Obviously, he's forced to do it, so it's not an act of racism. And as far as comedy is concerned, the only comedy is the insanity of somebody actually doing this.
You're damn right it's a police matter. For your own safety, I suggest you hide your butt in my shop till the police get here.
What the fuck?
Oddly enough, I have seen this movie on TV with the scene kept intact. Granted, not for some time, but I've also seen it shamelessly edited to say I hate everyone. That makes absolutely no fucking sense, and if you get offended by this, well, that's too bad. It's not an offensive scene. And even though I don't want this whole bit to turn into a race discussion, the whole movie does handle it quite well. Zeus wasn't fond of white people even before this event, accusing John of being racist throughout the film, but it's soon made clear that's not the case, and he even calls out Zeus on his bullshit.
I'll tell you what your problem is. You don't like me because you're a racist.
What?
You're a racist. You don't like me because I'm white.
It's the kind of thing you will not see today because fuck decency, but it's nice to see there was a time when we respectfully handled this issue, that being the 90s. To get back on topic, Die Hard 3 is an amazing film with a lot of things to like about it. A pretty decent villain, a lot of great set pieces, and dialogue that this generation desperately needs. But despite all that, it's still not the greatest action movie of all time. This is the greatest action movie of all time, I think.
Positively shocking.
A movie of such significance, multiple actors were offered the role, including Schwarzenegger and Stallone, but just because it takes the top spot on this list doesn't mean it's perfect. It does have some significant flaws. You see, the scene when John holds Tony at gunpoint, he could have just shot him and avoided the whole incident, or proceeded to hold him at gunpoint to get information. The fact that he chose to engage in physical combat made no sense. Then, when he finally does take on Carl, he is clearly hung and remains hung for a long time. So the fact that he comes back at the end also makes no sense. And finally, my favorite character, Christoph, is not killed, simply knocked out and is never seen again. I mean, technically, so was Theo, but his role was nowhere near as prominent, so there you have it. It makes no sense. Not a perfect movie.
What an asshole.
But in all seriousness, I really am at a disadvantage, as there is not anything bad to say about this movie. It's a rare example of everything coming together perfectly. Even something like Terminator 2 Judgment Day still has flaws, not enough that I care, but there are a couple of plot holes. You could probably find something if you really dug into this, but nothing to even hint at the idea that it's remotely overrated. The action scenes are perfect, never going on longer than they need to, and as mentioned multiple times earlier, the everyman concept of John McClane is kept intact here. Yeah, no single man is gonna pull off such a heroic feat, but compared to what we get in the future, this feels a lot more genuine. Not to mention the scenes themselves are just real damn good. Given that it's the first movie, the whole relationship thing does not have a chance to get ruined, or copy and pasted, and again, it's very believable. The side characters work great in this movie, all likable or intentionally dislikable, and something I haven't mentioned yet are these movies not being afraid to have fun with themselves and embrace what they are. It's something the fifth movie wouldn't do, but it's clearly not absent here. It's one of those things you really miss nowadays. When movies are clearly fictional, they refuse to accept that. But Die Hard is the example of what an action movie should be. The characters are developed, the pacing is absolutely perfect, it's definitely a fun movie, and even though it wasn't needed, it does embrace the Christmas theme. Apparently, Bruce Willis thinks otherwise, but opposed to Die Hard 2 that was just set at the time, there is a good number of references to the season in this movie. In fact, it heavily ties into the climax. Luckily, it does not have to be watched then, and obviously we have to bring up Alec Rickman as Hans Gruber. Not only is it the best performance in the movie, it's the first thing he ever did, and it's one hell of a debut.
I read about them in Time magazine.
The climax is still the best here, in which they kind of didn't tell him he was going to be dropped at that time to create the element of shock. But the fact of the matter is, it's Die Hard. It's the definition of perfection. It's something I still watch almost every year, and obviously it's the best in the franchise. And that was my predictable ranking of all the Die Hard movies. It is what it is. I tried to find a reason to do something different, but in the end, the public opinion seems to have this one down. At least I won't have too many people complaining, aside from a few comments on the third movie. And if that's the case, you can leave them down below, along with any other thoughts you might have. Maybe you're a contrarian and despise what I've done here, but like I said, it couldn't be helped. I'm the analyst, and remember kids, if you really want to complain about something being offensive, then complain about Family Guy. I mean, it's terribly written and offensive as all hell. So, you've made it to the end. That's an impressive feat indeed. Since you managed that, I guess check out the gaming channel, in which I cover a variety of gaming topics, like analysis videos, such as this one. If you're into that, then press the link in the description. It's that simple.